that is the session on Sunderbans. Before that, we will small brief video of the Chamber's activity as relief work in Sunderbans area after Amphan. So I would request the tech team to please play it. The Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry has always stood with and by the fellow citizens in times of crisis. In mid-2009, when large parts of West Bengal were ravaged by a cyclone of monstrous proportions, our team from the Bengal Chamber visited the cyclone-battered villages in remote and inaccessible places where relief had not reached the population. This time as well, the Chamber provided relief materials to one of the worst affected areas in South 24 Parganas, devastated by the super cyclone Amphan.
We have just finished loading the entire relief material that we are taking on 4 trucks, inclusive of 500 tarpaulin sheets, 500 solar lanterns, biscuits, ORS, noodles, and so much more.
The Chamber Secretariat visited Ramganga village in Pathar Pratima on 30th May 2020 with 4 trucks carrying relief materials. 500 tarpaulin sheets, 500 solar lanterns, basic medicines, 12,000 packets of biscuits were handed over to Sri Rathin Chandra De, BDO Pathar Pratima.
বেঙ্গল চেম্বার অফ কমার্স থেকে আজকে 500 বেনিফিশিয়ারির জন্য ত্রিপল, ড্রাই ফ্রুটস, বিস্কিট, এছাড়া সোলার ল্যান্টেন, মেডিসিন, এই সমস্ত জিনিস তারা নিয়ে এসেছেন, নিজে হাতে নিয়ে এসে এখানে দিয়েছেন। কিছু জিনিস এই স্পটে দেওয়া হয়েছে, রামগঙ্গায় যে মানুষ যারা এফেক্টেড হয়েছে বাঁধ ভাঙায় বন্যার ফলে সেই মানুষের হাতে তুলে দিয়েছেন। কিছু জিনিস আমার ব্লক অফিসে রাখা আছে, যেটা দূরবর্তী অঞ্চলে আমরা পাঠানোর ব্যবস্থা করবো আগামীকালই। তাদের এই শুভ উদ্যোগের জন্য রামগঙ্গার সমস্ত পাথর প্রতিমা অঞ্চলের সমস্ত অধিবাসীর পক্ষ থেকে, ব্লক প্রশাসনের পক্ষ থেকে সকলকে ধন্যবাদ।
Additionally, 500 buckets were handed over to villages including water bottles, biscuits, puffed rice, flat rice, jaggery, powder milk for babies, sanitary napkins, ORS, noodles. The Chamber had earlier sought the advice of Dr. P. Ulaganathan, District Magistrate of South 24 Parganas, for disbursement of relief materials, following which the Chamber was asked to visit Pathar Pratima.
Well, Angola.
Yes, sir.
Can I take leave?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you once again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
So we are moving on to the next session, that is climate resilient strategies for vulnerable Sunderbans. The session would be chaired by Mr. Alok Mukherjee, past President of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have with us Mr. Jayanto Chakraborty, Senior General Manager, Indophil Industries Limited and Co-Chairperson, Agriculture Committee and Rural Development Committee, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Devolina Sen Gupta, Associate Director, TEES Gas and Fuels Research Center, WEF Nexus Coordinator, Texas A&M Energy Institute. Professor Andy Lurch, Director UKRI's GCRF Living Deltas Research Hub, School of Geography, Politics and Sociology, Newcastle University. Dr. Anurag Danda, Senior Visiting Fellow, Observer Research Foundation, and Mr. Alexei Levene, co-founder, Desalonator. So with this, I would request Mr. Alok Mukherjee to take forward this session.
Thank you very much, everyone, and a very good afternoon to all of you. And for some, very good morning. And for Devalina, I think it's a very good early morning. It must be around 4 o'clock there now. Sorry to have put you up to this, but unfortunately we couldn't avoid this. Thank you very much, all of you. I add my own welcome to the speakers, Mr. Jayanta Chakraborty, Devalina Sengupta, Professor Andy Lurch, Dr. Danda, and Mr. Alexei Levin. Now, of course, Angona has already told you about their designation, what are they, so I won't repeat that again. Just for an introduction, can I have that photographs, Angana? Can I have that photograph of the screen, which I sent
Sorry, sir?
to Shuchi Smita?
Yes, sir. Huh?
Where is the photo? The photo should be on the screen now. Shuchi Smita has confirmed to me that yes, they will show you the photo, the technical team.
Yes, I'm sharing.
Yep, thank you. This is something which came out in the paper of today is the 27th of August, and I think these items of news with the photographs came on the paper on 22nd of August, just 5 days earlier. Yeah, well, it's not very, very clear, but if you can see this, there is one place near Sunderban here. This is called the Mosumi Islands, and this one is called the Shumoti Nagar area. And mind you, this is not a cyclone which is causing this devastation. People are trying to save themselves and their belongings, and the whole area is flooded here. It is not that cyclone. The cyclone came in May, 20th May, if I remember, Dampan. This is a second one, which is because of breaching the embankment in many places because of heavy rains and other reasons. And the whole one after hundreds of villages have been flooded. So it's a coincidence that we are talking today about resilience, climate resilience and Sundarban, particularly in view of this. Yes, you can take care of the photograph, please. So you see, these people, as you see, who are trying their best to save themselves, their families and their belongings, we cannot try to tell them what is climate change, how it happens, what should they do. It is for all of us to do something about climate change. I think resilience is the best source for survival in such cases. If you remember Darwin, he said it is not the strongest of the species, not even the most intelligent one, but only the one who can adapt themselves well to this environment will survive and thrive. Here all that is resilience. And here also people will thrive if we make arrangement for their resilience. So these people you saw are living on the edge of Sunderbans. Climate change and uncertainty. Unfortunately, climate risk factor index 2020 has just been published, and India ranks 5th after Japan, Philippines and Madagascar. Not only that, also the losses due to climate change is the highest in India amongst all these countries. I think totally 150 countries or something like that. That's 37.8 billion only for climate change. Sundarban today is the largest contiguous mangrove forest, one of the most highly modified estuary in the world, about 10,000 kilometers, 60% falls in Bangladesh, 40% in India. This is a coastal delta also in the confluence of the river Meghna, Brahmaputra, and the Ganges. Many rare and globally threatened wildlife like Royal Bengal tiger, all of you know about this, estuarian crocs, water monitor lizards are here. Apart from that, it's a biogenic coast with biodiversity, tremendous biodiversity, very rich in biodiversity. And it is also sustaining lives and livelihoods for people. There are about 3.5 million people who are sustained on Sundarban. And they are all endangered by this, all threatened by this. Any rise in sea level can destroy or at least fundamentally change the complete ecosystem. Sea levels will rise and the full impact will go on through decades after that. We shall not talk anything about why climate change and what is global warming. I think the audience knows all about this. But what is happening because of that is these storm strikes are becoming common, not just only in India, but all over the world, particularly in the US. And this will become probably more frequent, more vicious in nature. It is the protector of Calcutta. Many people don't know as long as it lasts. After that, of course, we don't know what's going to happen. We are lucky to some extent because most of the cyclones hit the northern coast of Odisha or southeast coast of Andhra Pradesh and then go to the Sundarban region. And but many of them go to Bangladesh and hit hard, very hard, in fact, before losing steam. Unfortunately, the response of both the countries, India and Bangladesh, and all of us, that means all of us, have been quite ad hoc, in situ only, by creating a protective infrastructure, later returning to the same condition. So this is neither keeping the region and its people poor, but it is also harming them. And in Bangladesh, where 30 to 70% of the country is flooded each year, it's very difficult for them to look only in the Sundarban area. Between 2059 around or 2020, 100, it will start long before that. There will be consequent sea level rise, increasing salinity concern. That's one of the major concerns, salinity concern, potable water scarcity, evaporation, precipitation, increase in violent storm, cyclone industry, and these will be the key climate change impacts and vulnerability. Adaptation in such cases must be transboundary, not localized, politics or no politics. So it's not just the government. Government must support this, but it is an action, increase of action of all this that I have just now talked about, that will give us resilience. So finally, we have to know about that. We have to either manage or strategically or retreat strategically from the at-risk location which will deliver development and conservation goals besides building climate resilience. In the Indian Sundarban, access to modern energy services remain a challenge, but thanks to some of the people, some of the villages have been electrified by solar ray, and the life literally stopped there after 6 p.m. I've been there and I've seen. But after this, the whole village is smiling even after 6 p.m. And not only that, but there are now ice cream parlor, beauty parlor even. They are running in the evening. And students can study. All this is happening, but they are very few and far between. The western sub-districts, there are no agricultural activities, unfortunately, because of salinity. That is a big problem. You see, a parcel of land anywhere is an asset. You can monetize the asset. But in Sundarban, for repeated inundation by saline water, this land has become useless. It cannot be monetized. So people are getting fed up and leaving the place. So what has to be protected, value of that is very relevant compared to what is the cost of protecting the same. But there are other factors, second order risk of political pressure, but let's not go into that. The whole thing depends on whether we are able to do things as we said. Otherwise, the adults will move. One of the major things of this resilience is the paddy. We have our Indian Agricultural Research Institute have done a very good work on that. So they have made seeds of paddy which can remain underwater without rotting for a number of days. Paddy which can remain under saline water for a number of days. So the distribution of that unfortunately have not been very good as we expect. So this is the situation as of today. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to see that the cyclone and its associated carnage and other is a curse. It's a curse to humanity. And to return to pre-calamity condition is always very difficult. The loss, the damage of a few hours battering by waves, winds and surges does undo the gains of many years of accumulative process and results. This is resulting in poverty, this is resulting in lack of development, and to work together, we must do it all together, not just the government, but the government, the NGOs. Forget about politics, democracy, but we must do it together for redeeming the situation. I think I'll end this with a question from the ex-president, immediate past president, I think, of François Hollande of France. He said that we have a single mission today, and that is to protect and hand over the planet to the next generation in the condition we receive it. I hope you can do that, but I have very big doubt. Thank you very much. That is the introduction that I wanted to give it to all of you here, including the speakers. And now I will, for the first call, I think is Mr. John Chakraborty will be the first speaker. You have already been told he's the senior general manager of the Indophil Industries. He will speak on food and water nexus in disaster management and uncertain livelihoods. Special focus on Sunderbans. Again, I'll remind all the speakers, I request them to please see that they could finish within 15 minutes because there is a session after this. It will be delayed, otherwise we'll end up ending late in the night. So, Mr. Jayanta Chakraborty, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mukherjee, for a wonderful introduction, and also good wishes to my co-speakers in this gathering. I am grateful to the Chamber and their partners for inviting me to share my thoughts on these occasions. I think my topic is food and water nexus in disaster management and uncertain livelihood with special focus on Sunderbans. In this topic, you will find there are four key words: food, water, disaster, uncertain livelihood. And now if we add to these four key words, it will culminate to agriculture. Because agriculture, source of food, agriculture needs water, disaster, worst effect is also the agriculture, and uncertain livelihood is the root cause of the failure of the agriculture. So, I will correlate food and water nexus in the perspective of agriculture in disaster management and uncertain livelihood in Sunderbans. The basic difference, actually, if we have to go for resilience in agriculture in Sunderbans, I think we have to understand the difference between a farmer and an entrepreneur. You see, we do not consider, Mr. Mukherjee has earlier told, that every land is an asset. It should give some return. If you compare one farmer with an entrepreneur, you will find a lot of similarities are there. A farmer needs land, labor, infrastructure, everything. An entrepreneur also needs land, labor, capital, and investment also. But the difference is that farmer cannot fix his produce, cost of produce. If entrepreneur can fix the cost of his produce and can market accordingly. This is the only profession or only business which runs on under open sky. So it is totally dependent on the vagaries of the nature. So there is a tremendous difference between a farmer and in other professions also. So when I link this to Sundarban, it becomes further worse because there are lots of reasons for that also. You see, in coastal zone represents a broad transitional zone between the land and the sea. Sundarban is no exception. It is strongly influenced by both the shoreline ecosystem and the near-shore sub-littoral ecosystem with land-based activities. The most common problem in Sundarbans is agriculture, is the lack of irrigation, high concentration of salts due to coastal influence, high sea surges following frequently occurred cyclones, and occasionally tsunami also. This is the biggest challenge in food and water nexus. The topic is that. In such situation, you just tell us how a farmer can sustain in Sundarban when his land is totally not under his control. He is totally being directed by the nature and he cannot produce any crop because of the natural calamities also. And being the proximity to the coastal area, his vulnerability is the highest in comparison to others also. Whatever land he is, recently when he visited the Sundarban after the Amphan, I think miles after miles of land we have interacted with the farmer are not only homeless, their profession has gone to dog because their entire land is under saline concentrations. And even couple of years back during the Ayla cyclone also, land is still not suitable for the cultivation of the agriculture because salinity concentration is too high. So this is the nexus between water and food and agriculture and rural people of Sundarban because of the disasters taking place on regular basis also. Another problem, we say Sundarban receives good quantum of rainfall. Yes, they receive good quantum of rainfall. 1800 millimeters they received in the good rainfall annually. But 90% of those rainfall occurred between July to September. What about the rest? There is hardly any rainfall distribution during the post-October to March or. So there is an acute shortage of good quality irrigation water for the crops. And in between, the disaster continuously hitting the shore and making their life miserable also. So one way, there is no water for the irrigation, there is no sustainability for their production facilities also, and river irrigation is also not possible because of brackish water also. And second thing, for deep table water also, you will find that good water is available at a depth of 900 to 1000 feet in Sundarban also. So just think about it, that how difficult it is the availability of water for their food production in Sundarban. And over and that, this is the disaster which is hitting continuously to these poor villagers, and they are totally directionless in present scenario also. So they don't have, their options are very limited. And during extreme events also, second thing is that the old river embankment, which is the prevalent also, they totally give the way. Saline salt encroaches the agricultural land. Even tidal fluctuations are increasing nowadays. Not only during the disaster, even tidal fluctuations now has become a regular phenomenon in Sundarban areas also, which is also inundating a substantial areas of the acreage also. This saline ingression in villages, particularly I can refer, if you go to Sagar, go to Namkhana, you go to Pathar Pratima, you will find, came across with the farmer, their major and only one concern is the salinity of their land also. And second thing is that the next of food and water nexus of the livelihood also. Because traditionally, Sundarban region is characterized by the small scale farmers, and paddy and beetle vine are the most prominent to people. And the irony is what? That even in the brittle vine areas also, you will find there is no proper guidance, infrastructure and hand holding by anybody else. They are producing. They don't know where to sell. And second thing, one cyclone can totally ravage their entire brittle vine and they will come to the streets. So there is a big gap between the cultivation practices, between their awareness also, and between the infrastructure also. And being a very export-worthy product also, they don't know the mechanism how to send it because the salmonella bacteria is fully present in the brittle vine also. So they don't get the prices also. And moreover, it is being dominated by the local coax, those who give the totally unscientific recommendation to these farmers also. So one way, it is the non-availability of water, available brackish water, and non-availability of technology. So totally their livelihoods are being totally thrown away. And in this process, you will find that lots of people from Sundarban are now going away from Sundarban to different parts of India and even in abroad, in like Mauritius and other things, for work for which they are not need for. Because they have nothing to do. And for which social impact is taking place also. Mostly the livelihood, mostly the family and society are now dominated by the female members because males are going slowly out from that area to the other areas also. And they are now compelled to work even lots of the brick fields which has come across the border of Bangladesh and India also. So it is a big problem for Sundarban area. And now coming to this thing, these are the issues, how we should go ahead. Because solution, we have to come with a solution. This forum is meant for that we should come with some recommendation which could be of use for them also. But these recommendations, ad hoc policies, ad hoc research, and ad hoc investment will not be the way forward. Because this needs a long-term sustainable approach by the government. Because this is a policy advocacy is required here also. You see, to me, the most practicality and environmentally non-destructive way of creating irrigation water is through harvesting excess rainwater that goes waste as runoff into the sea. So you have to harvest your excess water during the monsoon season. That has to be stored and that has to be utilized for your upcoming crops also. This requires a huge intervention of institutions like government, NABARD, and other infrastructure organizations, where they should come forward to do these things activities also. It can be done effectively through suitable land shaping. I think land shaping is the most key term for this thing of the farmland, which involves in modifying the surface of the land for harvesting of excess rainwater as well as making the land surface suitably shaped for adoption of improved cultivation of diversified crops and integrated farming. So far we know in Sagar or in Sundarban, farmers are going for paddy, then fallow. They generally focus their on paddy also. But ultimately, because of these vagaries, these climatic distortions, they are not getting the produce, they are not getting the quantity, and they are not getting the remuneration also. So I think time has come to go for beyond. I think my slogan will be beyond paddy in Sundarban. During the peak season, post-September season, they have to go for if they have to make their business sustainable. And this will help in agriculture, aquaculture, livestock integrated farming system. You see, only agriculture is not the way out in Sundarban or anywhere in the rural area also. You have to go for agriculture, aquaculture, livestock integrated farming system for higher productivity and livelihood security. Because you should have an inclusive agriculture into their land. So there should be better utilization. Second thing, which I have told earlier also, that diversification has to be there. If we like to save Sundarban, we have to create a belief to the farmers. Yes, they can go for other crops where water availability has to be made so that their income should be there. And like legumes, like oilseeds, like vegetables in the cropping system, they have to incorporate this. And for which rainwater harvesting is the better thing for going beyond September, so that in the Rabi season, we say, they can go for this thing also. And second thing, and third thing I should say, Government of India has come out with lots of amendment of Essential Commodities Act now, where they have liberalized the farm gate purchase in the system also. So I think Sundarban farmer now needs to form farmers producers organizations, so that they can have a better negotiating partner with their purchaser also, so that they can grow better food and they can connect with the city like Calcutta or other places, so that they can get a good price also. So this is the thing, that ultimately disaster will come. We cannot stop disaster, because whenever environment and developments are there, disasters will come. How to mitigate this thing? That is the basic solution also. And to come to closer to my presentations, there is an example. People have made it in Sundarban itself. I think Bengal Chamber has worked with this. There is a cooperative dairy formed by the Sundarban, the villagers, the female members of the villagers of Sundarban. They have formed a cooperative society. Through that, they are selling the milk to the Calcutta. And now their earnings have improved many things. So I think these FPOs, these cooperatives, this new technology, all these things is required now, so that they should get more empowerment. If we do not make empowered the Sundarban villagers, farmers, and their family members, this restriction, I should say, the mitigating activity will be further delayed. We need to make them more powerful, more empowerment also. And lastly, I think no ad hoc investment. Please, I think many a times we see there is a big bond is coming, 5 crore rupees has come. These are all ad hoc investment. So my proposal is that it should be a very, very well calculated long-term investments. We should, where NABARD, where Government of India, where local authorities should involve together. 3 to 4 years long-term plan should be there, and there should be a Government of India and Government of West Bengal should have a exclusive policy for the Sundarban for sustainable development, for making these farmers more empowered by making available their produce more effective and more remunerated to the farmers. That's all from my side.
Sir, your mic, please. Mr. Alok Mukherjee, your mic, please.
Sorry. Now you can hear me, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
Elaborate exactly what I said, and salinity of water, destroying the land value totally. And then the most important thing that he has suggested some solution, like water harvesting in monsoon. I think it's very, very necessary, land reshaping, and beyond paddy, of course. And they are trying to do that. And there is a lot of human-animal conflict. You know, there are people who are woodcutters, fish farmers, honey collectors, crab collectors. They are facing tigers, and they are every season, every year, a number of people are killed. And we have to do something about this human-animal conflict that is occurring almost every year. Thank you very much, Mr. Chakraborty. Well, now if Devolina has managed to keep awake, then I would I'm very pleased to call upon the next speaker, Dr. Devolina Sengupta, from, actually he is the director of Tees Gas and Fuel Research Center in Texas. She will speak on disaster resilient energy and water nexus strategies in disaster prone areas of the Sunderbans. Devolina, please.
Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure to be represented on this panel. And it is very interesting to learn. I've learned so much about the Sundarbans after Cyclone
I'm glad to see, Devolina, that you are fully awake. Good.
Thank you so much. So today I've again, as Mr. Mukherjee is mentioning, I'm kind of like, I thought it would be good to keep within the time limits, and I've recorded my lecture and I've sent it over to Angona. So if we can start by playing the lecture, and I'll give a few comments after that.
Right.
So, tech team to please play the Bulinas video.
We are witnessing history, and we are living through it. The total coronavirus cases around the world are more than 23.5 million people. The total deaths have been more than 800,000 people. The pandemic has been truly a disaster. However, we are also seeing several other natural disasters strike during the pandemic: cyclones, wildfires, earthquakes, flooding. We have also seen some other impacts from the pandemic, which have resulted in negative oil prices, energy disruptions, migrant laborers, lockdowns, unemployment. As we speak, 2 tropical storms, Marco and Laura, are headed for the US Gulf Coast. People are evacuating. According to the United States Federal Emergency Management Agency, the definition of a disaster is a natural catastrophe, a technological accident, or human-caused event that has resulted in severe property damage, deaths, and/or multiple injuries. In most cases, we see that the assistance given to people are far less compared to their actual needs. Shifting our focus to the Ganga Delta region, it is home to one of the world's largest continuous mangrove forests, the Sunderbans. This vanishing forest protects the coasts and lives of 2 countries, India and Bangladesh. Rising waters and illicit logging are killing the trees that are the natural wall that protects the India-Bangladesh coast. Out of 7.5 million people who call this place home, about 1 million people have already migrated north. According to the International Union of Conservation for Nature, the Sunderbans region has already been placed in a significant concern zone, and they have concluded that while internationally funded programs are underway, the study into the resilience of the site in the face of multiple changes are required. On May 20th, Cyclone Amphan, a Category 5 cyclone, hit the coast of West Bengal. Sunderbans took a direct hit. The initial estimated damage at that time was about $13.5 billion US. While we all agree that climate and disasters are intertwined and cause and effect relationships are debated, the impacts are felt by humans, by us. The duration of impacts may last from hours to years, and disruptive strategies are needed to bring an immediate and quicker impact to the regions affected. Going into the details of the causes and impacts, I would like to draw your attention to 3 different figures that I'm going to show. The first is an identified resilience priorities in the Sunderbans. This came out of a World Bank report on building resilience for sustainable development. And desalination plant, lifeline energy services, sustainable traditional agriculture, modernization of aquaculture are some of the identified priorities. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures that came to me directly after the cyclone Amphan. The first figure shows saline water deposited on farmlands from storm surge. So when the sea level rises due to the storm, the water goes onto farmlands and it impacts the agricultural land. It can be through loss of crops, it can be through long-term crop productivity loss, as well as there can be some freshwater fish that gets contaminated. The flooding is another major impact, and this impacts contamination of drinking water resources. So the surface salinity water is undrinkable, and also this can go into the deep borewell tubewells and create saline contamination of that water. So just as a perspective, about 96% of water on the earth comes from oceans and 2.5% is from freshwater resources. Coincidentally, the freshwater resources are the ones which are used mainly for our purposes of drinking as well as irrigation. Here we see that the surface water and the groundwater, which combined give the freshwater resources, they account for most of our domestic, public supply, industrial, irrigation, thermoelectric, mining, livestock, and aquaculture. In the United States, California and Texas are two of the major users of water withdrawals, and these can come from mainly groundwater resources. So, as expected, both of these states are facing major challenges related to water use. And if you see in California, maximum of this comes for irrigation, and in Texas, most of it goes into thermoelectric power. As we saw, 96% of ocean resources opens up a large untapped resource. However, the removal of salts is necessary for drinking and agricultural uses of saline water. The solution can come from desalination of water. Desalination is the technology to remove dissolved salts from water, and membrane-based or thermal-based solutions are available. However, one major issue in desalination is the energy needed to desalinate the water. The other issues faced by desalination are fouling of membranes, which make the process non-robust, or highly expensive equipment, for example, equipment that's required to handle the corrosivity of the saline water. These desalination technologies have been widely used in the Middle East and North African region to obtain water for all purposes. Increasingly, it is being used in India. Currently, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu are making use of desalination technology. This brings us to water energy nexus. To obtain clean water that is not naturally occurring, we need energy, and to obtain energy, we need to use water. The balance between the two is often referred to as water-energy nexus. As an engineer, I like to propose solutions. So the next part of my talk is going to focus on solutions for disaster-resilient food, energy, and water nexus systems. Before we go into that, we need to understand what the disaster management cycle involves. It involves response, recovery, mitigation, and preparedness for disaster. Historically, the disaster management has been looking at risk reduction, risk management, and strategies to simply reduce or manage the entire cycle of disaster. However, the disaster resilient systems proposes a different approach. It takes an engineering-based systems approach towards designing, intercepting, and managing disaster impacts through advanced process systems engineering methods. So one may ask, what is process systems engineering? It is a field of process systems engineering has been around in various forms over 50 years, but it was formally named PSE or Process Systems Engineering in 1982. And broadly, it involves different areas such as process design, controls, and operations, including product design. It includes modeling of processes in steady state and dynamics, process calculations, computational methods for optimization, control systems, operations research, numerical analysis, and computer science. It also includes the creation and assessment of alternatives and engineering in the presence of uncertainty. So this is just a snapshot of what process systems engineering. Resilient systems engineering is part of process systems engineering, where we look at the different attributes such as reliability, robustness, safety, flexibility, pliability, and agility. And one very distinct thing about resilient systems engineering is the time that is of importance and the time to recover. So if we look at this figure where we see a disruption occurring, and surviving the disruption phase is a part of resilience, as well as recovering from the disruption is a second part of resilience. So together this forms the resilience domain. There can be different variations. There can be a gradual decline and then increase in performance, or gradual decline and long-term impact can be in decline from nominal performance levels. So how do we combine the disaster resilience to food, energy, water nexus systems? So the process systems community has been studying water energy nexus through the design of advanced process design and integration of water and energy systems, resulting in state-of-the-art desalination systems. Resilience has also been studied at length by many systems engineers. But combining the disaster conditions for resilience and applying this to food, energy, water nexus systems design is a completely new area of research, and this is a concept that is being presented here for the first time. I've broken this down into two different parts. One is the design part, where we are looking at, if you remember the disaster cycle, we have disaster preparedness condition, where we have variable powered on-land mobile food, energy, water nexus system. This is a mobile unit of desalination which is powered by variable energy sources, and it produces drinking water and advanced soilless farming options for food security while soil is under salinity treatment. This can be very useful in post-disaster recovery phase to sustain economic growth and employment. Then comes the disaster response phase, where we have the same container unit, placed in a mobile on-water desalination unit. It produces drinking water in situ using the saline or brackish water, and the food from co-located soilless farms or storage areas will be taken to disaster relief areas along with the water treatment units, and this reduces the risks to disrupted supply chains, which may happen when you're trying to bring in packaged drinking water. But these systems need advanced system scheduling and planning. They are not going to be an ad hoc process, and these are expensive units that you have to be very careful in scheduling and planning. So that requires a disaster preparedness location identification. Where will these be placed during the disaster preparedness conditions, as we mentioned, and where will they be deployed for disaster response deployment areas. Now, this disaster response is occurring in different places, and we cannot predict which places these are. We'll have about 5 to 10 days of lead time when we know that a storm has formed and which are the areas that will be requiring the disaster response. So that is the type of planning that we need to have, and we need to do through these advanced modeling systems. With that, I would like to give a brief overview of why we are qualified to do this kind of research. I'm coming from the Texas A&M Energy Institute. It is a joint institute between Texas A&M University and the Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station. Our motto is to discover energy solutions and improve quality of life. We have a partnership model, we have research wing and an education wing. I would like to draw your attention to one of our research projects that I'm currently working on. It's called Diamond, where we are looking at deploying intensified, automated, mobile, operable novel designs for treating shale gas wastewater. And shale gas wastewater is very high salinity, so we already are working on units of this kind. We also have been working on a National Science Foundation grant on resiliency enhancement and disaster impact interception in the manufacturing sector. So we do have some experience in working on disasters. The Texas A&M Energy Institute partners with more than 290 faculties represented through 9 colleges and schools and more than 20 Texas A&M University departments, 2 Texas A&M University branch campuses, and other institutions and 4 state agencies. We work through a partnership-based model, which is our engagement model. And we are part of the Texas A&M University system, which is one of the United States' largest higher education systems. It is the largest intake of students last year. And it is made up of also 8 state agencies, 11 universities, and a comprehensive health sciences center, as well as the newly opened Rellis campus. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention and your time, and you can reach me at this address. Thank you so much for the video, and I would like to conclude by saying that these advanced designs that we are planning, and we want to do these, and Sunderbans can be one of the areas where we could implement such advanced designs to see how it can impact the lives and have disruptive technologies to change some of the impacts that we have been talking about in the past.
Thank you very much, Debulina. It was wonderful. I learned a lot of things, particularly about the new things that you said, process system engineering and resilient system engineering. If I was I were a little younger, I would have probably gone there and tried to learn more about this. But it would be lovely if through Bengal Chamber we can do something of what you are going to do right now. You will need pilots, you will need new experiments, or not experiments really, but utilizing this technology. And we would love to have your people here to do something in Sunderbans in collaboration with Bengal Chamber. That would be very, very good. Thank you once again very much for this knowledge that you have got. Our next speaker is Professor Andy Ladd, who is the Director of UKRI CGCRF Living Deltas, and he will speak on disaster management, tipping points, and socio-economic development in the Delta, with particular reference to the Sunderbans. Andy, please.
Thank you very much, sir. I hope you can all see the screen.
Yes, we can.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much, and I'll just start my timer, so I'll try to keep the time.
Thank you.
I'm representing over 100 colleagues now on the Living Deltas Hub, and what I would like to do today is to just really try and touch on some of these sort of big issues, but also to highlight areas where we would certainly like to work with Bengal Chamber in the future towards policy direction, towards sustainable solutions. Just taking the world as a whole, this is a 2015 infographic from the now sort of superseded International Global Biosphere program, which is now Future Earth, showing deltas at risk. And rather than get stuck into the issues on all of these deltas, typically, while deltas cover 1% of the world's land area, they are home to about 500 million people. And we know the numbers for the Sundarban as well. And if we just focus in on the Sundarban, we can see that the key thing is that these delta systems, what we call social ecological systems, given that they are a delicate balance, has been said, between land and water, people and nature, they're on a trajectory of unsustainability. These are just 2 of the deltas we're working in. The red colors indicate areas that are significantly at risk of sea level rise. The aim of the Living Deltas program is through partnership, and that's a key word, to help avoid the collapse of these deltas away from being functioning, highly productive systems, what attracted people to them there in the first place, due to human impacts and due to projected adverse consequences of climate change. And as one of my colleagues, Professor Tuhin Ghosh, is very keen on pointing out, is that the delta is not homogeneous. There are distinct variations from north to south and from east to west. And so a one-fits-all approach is typically inappropriate. If we think about tipping points, the tipping points we are seeing are tipping towards unsustainability. The green delta on the top left of this diagram is what we might call a Holocene delta ecosystem, or an ecological system, where the delta is in equilibrium with its geographic environment. Sediment is eroded from the highlands of the Himalaya and moved to the sea, and dynamic processes dominate. And these deltas extend hundreds and thousands of kilometers out into the Bay of Bengal. Over time, though, we have seen the increasing human influence. This was mentioned by our chair at the beginning of the session, where humans increased their influence on the delta. We modified it. Culture took over at that point in terms of how human influences shaped the delta in different places to different extents for different deltas. We're now, however, at the point where we're at what we might call the Anthropocene stage, where we're now, the social ecological system is pretty much completely altered through human intervention. The Ganga Delta is different here, of course, because we still are fortunate to have the Sunderbans, which large areas are core, but they're under increasing threat. Other areas of deltas, some of the ones that Devalita would have worked on in America, for example, and also ones in Europe are completely altered. What we don't want to get to is to cross into irreversible thresholds or tipping points to where society chooses to abandon or can no longer protect a delta. Now, our previous speaker just talked about 1 million people already having moved. We don't want that movement to be uncontrolled or compressed into a small period of time. And if we look at the axes on that diagram, I've just titled them risk and vulnerability and structure and function. But if we just call them conditioning indices, anthropogenic conditioning indices, hazard exposure, and then add on the issue of investment deficit in many of these world's deltas, which are on the thresholds and on the margins of countries normally. We can then relate that to the literature, and we can see here an example from Zachary Tester back in 2015, looking at 48 deltas worldwide, with the colors darker to use to illustrate risk. And this is the Ganges-Brahmaputra delta highlighted here, which is in an area of high conditioning and also high hazard. And the size of that, the circle, it also indicates the investment deficit index. So many of these people are poor, and the supply chains and the markets are not in place to allow that resilience. And then if we take another diagram from Tesla, we can see that it gets worse in terms of trying to multiply those together to produce risk. If we throw those three indexes together and multiply them, the Ganges comes out particularly badly, and the only other one is a small one, the smaller delta on eastern India, the Krishna. So that the issue here also is that the Bay of Bengal is experiencing some of the highest rises in relative sea level rise across the planet. Sea level rise is not rising equally across our globe. It's enhanced in some areas, and the Bay of Bengal is one area. So how do we then avoid these threats? What we have seen, and we've seen in some pictures over the last couple of days, are repeat pictures, particularly of Amphan. But in November last year, we had Bulbul, we've had Isla referred to because of the long-term impacts of that. And Devalina also showed a diagram of resilience and lags in the system. And the issue is that over time, what we have had is sort of, again, an unequal sort of balance of discussion between authorities, policymakers, between experts or researchers like me, and communities. And the communities tend to end up at the bottom of the chain. And so we get stuck into a cycle of impact and react, where we see a repeat cycle of impacts and short-term reactions. I was really interested in some of those technological advances that were just mentioned in the last session. We see that social ecological systems are characterized by repeated reactions to events, but few collectively arrived at, and therefore truly sustainable solutions. And ultimately, we see a low system robustness. and an often long-term recovery. We mentioned Isla. Obviously, we talk about a 10-year and more recovery period for that event. Sweetwater ponds in Bulbul were destroyed within 48 hours. We were told that they would take 3 years potentially to recover, but then Umfang came in 6 months. So quite often these events are synergistic. We've also seen that we have had a historically slow transformation. The great acceleration from 1950 has seen a huge increase in our technological capacity. But when we talk about nature and systems, that tends to be a bit slower. So our SDGs, we know we are struggling to keep up with the timescale set by the United Nations for those. Our adaptability modes are slow. We don't learn lessons. We don't build capacity to change in a way that builds system memory. And our targeted investment is quite often in terms of the industrial growth that was referred to yesterday, in particular in terms of economic growth, but not in terms of environmental growth. We are potentially moving to the point where communities are getting a bigger say, as shown by that infographic there to the top right, but they're still not in the right place to the change here. And what we know is that resilience simply cannot come from technological advances. The Sunderbans themselves have been hit by 32 damaging cyclones over the last 2 decades alone, and we know that that will continue. And we know that disaster management improvements, despite technology, have been iterative, but they haven't been transformational. So while we have good communications between policymakers, between authorities, between disaster management agencies, the average person on the Delta does not have a mobile phone, and therefore in terms of actually being able to get the communication, for example, to respond, that tends to again come in a top-down way. And for resilience, therefore, we need rapid transformational change. This was emphasized yesterday. We need strengthened capacity. We need education. We need a more circular economy. Several speakers yesterday referred particularly to that. But one of the things that we emphasize, particularly in Living Deltas Hub and how we want to proceed, is through equitable partnerships, where communities have an equal place at the table with authorities and experts, where resilience is raised through managing the Sunderbans better through an ecosystem-based, evidence-based approach. And Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that already at the very beginning of the session when you talked about the need for transboundary approaches, difficult as they may be. We need to protect and enhance the mangroves. We need to, the World Heritage status threat, surprisingly, is under threat. And yet they are probably one of the greatest human protection mechanisms we have on the planet. So therefore we need to look at natural cultural heritage and move towards nature-based solutions. And we're talking about that already through webinars you've already held in terms of building back better and Kolkata's green recovery, and those need to continue. So what are the future-oriented policy options for the Sunderbans? We can divide those into either managed adaptive approaches, that's the orange line on this diagram, which are more holistic and long-term. They're appropriate where responsibility can be assigned to authorities to track changes in risk and to manage change through multiple interventions. That orange line promotes flexibility to respond to future changes, as well as what we might call uncertainties, and climate change is one of those. And it does emphasize existing natural protection, it emphasizes resilience, and gives us space potentially for nature-based solutions. The other option is the sort of precautionary approach where things either get to the point where it's not possible to adapt to those multiple interventions, and that might mean managed retreat. It's appropriate potentially where future adaptation may be technically infeasible to administer. And we've got to bear in mind the variety on the Delta that I mentioned at the beginning. And they're appropriate where one-off intervention becomes the only option, and that really is a depressing way. The problem with that is if you then look at that line, the green line, the level of acceptable risk that can be tolerated, that is changing because of climate change. Our freedom of choices and the time we have for precautionary approaches are fast diminishing due to that pace of climate change. And as has been mentioned by you, Chair, as for Sunderbans, they're complicated by geopolitics and transboundaries. So complications and challenges for the Sunderbans show that there is a clear relationship between hazard exposure, between the rising risk, between the loss of system robustness, and importantly with the social system vulnerability. And this is shown in this diagram in terms of a sort of movement from left to right on that diagram. Coping capacity, which is outlined in one of those green buttons in the middle, and the adaptive capacity, deficits in those are directly correlated with poverty. And an intersectional approach, therefore, is key in the Sunderbans. Gender, youth, but also recognizing that gender must not only just emphasize women, but the role of both women and men in terms of how we can avoid increased impacts in those most vulnerable areas of the social ecological systems. And we must learn over generations too. We must tap into the locally rooted knowledge that in many cases has been forgotten. We can call that locally rooted knowledge coping capacity and adaptive capacity. Quite often they tend to be ignored because of our technology. And we can also see that when we talk about inequalities, even on a global scale, our agreements and agendas are hindered by regional inequities, especially in deltas, which are most at risk. So if we take this view of the SDGs, we know we've got the Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 169 targets, 17 goals. We know we've got the Paris Agreement, which goes towards COP26, which should have been this November, but is next year. And we know that we have the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, all big overarching aims. But ultimately, what we are still suffering is degraded biospheres in deltas and loss of ecosystem services. On a society level, we're seeing unsustainable and wasteful economies. That was mentioned a number of times yesterday. Society is inequitable and the partnerships are still non-optimal. In Living Deltas, what we want to do is turn that on its head. We want to develop new policy partnerships right from the beginning towards sustainable deltas. We are trying to work across the region to develop transboundary collaboration and learn lessons from deltas so that they can be brought to other deltas and the good things learned. We're trying to help build more resource-efficient circular economies and helping people to recognize the damage being done to their society. We're taking an intersectional approach, trying to develop a more equitable society, and we're trying to, through that, develop a more resilient biosphere. What would that look like in terms of policy? On those levels, we need a partnership approach to protection and incorporation of natural cultural heritage. Already mentioned by Jayanta, we need to create those essential market chain linkages with the focus on the rural poor. We need to create local green and business opportunities for income generation towards the SDGs. That was mentioned yesterday. And we need better mangrove system protection, and that will lead to long-term evidence-based policy towards climate change mitigation, more sustainable communities, energy use and infrastructure. And in Living Deltas, we're doing this on a variety of scales. We're taking a natural cultural heritage focus and building the evidence base through nature-based solutions, environmental monitoring, and looking at localizing the SDGs that was mentioned by President-elect Mukherjee yesterday, and towards resilient deltas. And we're also then building equitable partnerships, looking at delta histories, hazard and risk, working with NGOs and agencies and policymakers to build resilience, characterize risk, and encourage behavioral change across sectors, towards those resilient deltas. Finally, in terms of the energy, water, food nexus and delta adaptive management, we put people, landscapes and ecosystems at the heart of our research and engagement. In terms of policy, we offer risk assessments, coastal tipping points and risk analyses. We're developing a Delta Health Index, SDG indicators, mapping saline intrusion, producing data on water pollution trends, livelihoods and behavioral change, intersectionality and the role of circular economy. And we're trying to describe this whole complexity and transform that into policy relevant results with policymakers. And my last slide is really, we were asked to talk about example policy priorities. The current status of the Sundarban represents a legacy of natural history with an overlay of human decisions, ongoing sea level rise and climate change affecting that. Those factors all shape vulnerability, complicated by unrecognized linkages, thresholds, and unintended consequences. But when we allow deltas to return to a dynamic state, resilience ecosystems re-emerge. Research shows that. So policy approaches should recognize an explicit role for ecosystem infrastructure, ecosystem services in disaster management approaches. Economists are already trying to do this, and more circular delta economies are urgently needed. Sustainable policy needs to be natural cultural heritage sensitive and should be co-produced with, very importantly, and give an effective voice to delta peoples. Policy ultimately should be able to do three things: cope with disturbances, maintain essential delta functions, but importantly not limit long-term socio-economic prospects. And nature-based solutions offer real potential. And something that was said yesterday, change is not delivered in solitude. The transformative policy we need needs to be nested within effective monitoring programs and co-designed with policymakers from the outset. Thank you very much. I realize I'm over and I apologize for
Thank
that.
you very much, Andy, for this lovely lecture on deltas. We learned a lot about deltas. That is not just a geographical thing, but a socio-ecological system. And the society must decide that what is the tipping points, whether they are going towards unsustainability or towards sustainability. And I agree that there are unfortunately few all agreed solutions, even in this country, as we see. And we learn from history that we don't learn anything from history. History has tried to teach us many things. Unfortunately, we have not taken that into account. And the managed adaptive precautionary approach, a managed adaptive and precautionary approach, this is most important in case of Sundarban. There is no doubt about that. And there are regional inequities, which is also. Thank you very much for giving us. Next, I would call upon and welcome Mr. A. Anurag Danda, who is a senior visiting fellow, Observer Research Foundation, adaptation, and he will speak on adaptation to climate change in Sundarban. With a request again to see if you can finish within 15 minutes, please. Yes, Mr. Danda?
Yes.
Okay. I thought you are not unmuted. All right.
No, I was not unmuted, so I was struggling to unmute myself.
I see. All right. But you are
okay. And now I have done something to my screen, and I don't know what has happened. Anyway, so I am hoping that you're able to see a map. Because, sir, as you started the session and you were describing, and as Professor Andy Large was also speaking, and he pointed out that one of his colleagues, Professor Tuhin Ghosh, maintains that Sunderbans is not homogeneous, and therefore I would like to show this map. In fact, I don't have a presentation or a set of slides, it's just that an image here. I don't know if you are able to see this. Are you able to see this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, the area in India that we call the Sunderbans is obviously not all forest. And we've heard that we are talking about a lot of people. And on the Indian side, the area that was historically Sunderbans, which is essentially all of these areas that are now called sub-districts within the two districts of North and South 24 Parganas, have been successively cleared since the 1770s. And therefore, obviously, as Professor Andy Large pointed out, the characteristics is not the same. They were never the same, and they're still not the same, and therefore the vulnerability is also not the same. It's not uniform. When we look at Sunderbans these days, the issue of global warming and climate change seems to, kind of predominate, and justifiably so, because as Professor Large has already said, Bay of Bengal is witnessing the most rapid rate of sea level rise, and it is not uniform all over. And even in terms of high intensity weather events within the Indian Ocean basin, Bay of Bengal not only accounts for the largest number of tropical storms, but also the largest number of casualties. despite the fact that overall Bay of Bengal only accounts for about 5% of tropical storms globally. What we do tend to forget and seem to have forgotten over a period of time is, and therefore I show this map. This is a map by James Rennell, published in the late 1770s, 1776. And so this is from the Bengal Atlas. The reason I show you this map is you can see the river Brahmaputra and the river Ganges are joining the sea independent of each other. They have not yet converged to form this huge estuary that we now know as the Meghna estuary. So obviously, there was a change in the early 1800s that changed a lot of delta characteristics. And that change has been ongoing. Global warming and its effects in terms of climate change is actually exacerbating the challenges we would have otherwise faced, probably not in our lifetimes that we are now currently doing, but these problems would have cropped up. Now it's just that they're cropping up earlier than they should have. And I very much liked the idea that Professor Andy Large conveyed through a graph going downward saying Holocene Delta. We started with the Holocene Delta, and then we are currently at the Anthropocene Delta. And obviously we don't want to be a collapsed delta. Now, because these changes have happened, and particularly the Indian side, which is this part, is now, and when I say now, I mean for several centuries now, probably sometime post 12th to 15th century, is sediment deficient. So when we are looking at adaptation solutions, we have to bear in mind that we are dealing with a system which is sediment deficient and which is also faced with sea level rise. And the relative sea level rise is obviously much higher than the absolute sea level rise. So we are dealing with a situation where things are getting increasingly difficult to adapt. And by the middle of the century, and this also Professor Large mentioned, that we could see large-scale inundation. I am not talking about disasters. In fact, at the very outset, Chairman Sir, when he was talking about introducing the Sunderbans, Sir, you mentioned about 2 incidents which just happened last week, not triggered by a high-intensity weather event, where embankments were breached, islands were inundated with brackish water, and so on and so forth. So challenges of those kind, by the middle of this century, are going to be many, many times more than what it currently is. And despite all the efforts, and possibly we see more concrete efforts in COP26 next year, despite all of those efforts, this scenario of 2050 is almost inevitable. So that means it's almost a given that we will see this kind of inundation. Now, this puts not only the natural area at risk of flooding, and which means the iconic tiger has less space. It also means humans, and who are very densely packed on the Indian side, also have less dry space. The first 2 presentations, particularly Mr. Joyanta Chakraborty, when he was talking about adaptation or building resilience in the agro ecosystem, I was thinking of this map and saying, okay, agroecosystem certainly will help now, but going forward, how do we still maintain agroecosystem as we currently know it without thinking of, either trying to resist or protect the land that we already have. We already have embankments, but these were not built to deal with sea level rise. These were, cleared forests, earthen embankments, just to keep the high tide water at bay. We can either take one of these approaches of resisting sea level rise and protecting the land that we have. But if you look at the location in the schematic representation here, we really don't have this space between human settlement and where this protective structure should come up. I am sure all of you have witnessed that there are settlements right at the edge. So the opportunity for this, to me, seems very difficult. However, I am neither a geographer nor an engineer. Probably Professor Large and Professor Sengupta will obviously know more than I do about this. But to me, having spent more than 20 years in that region, I have seen people inhabiting pretty much on the edge. And these are people who are less well endowed. So people who study social sciences and talk about, the core and the periphery of a society, marginal people live in the margins, in the Sunderbans. Whereas in well-to-do areas, it is the well-to-do people who want to occupy open spaces, sea-facing, water-facing areas. But in the case of the Sunderbans, it is the marginal people who are occupying the very margins of the islands, and therefore opportunity for this kind of a protective structure, to me, does not seem very easy unless we move these people further inland. The other option is to try and accommodate without trying to build these physical structures. And when I say building these physical structures, our current experience with Cyclone Amphan compared to Cyclone Isla have been quite different because of the very difference in the two systems, and also the time at which it made landfall. So therefore, despite the fact that Cyclone Isla was of a lower intensity storm compared to Cyclone Amphan, the damage was far more widespread during Cyclone Isla. If we are trying to accommodate, sorry, before I get into accommodate, I just want to mention that post-Cyclone Isla, about 183 kilometer long embankment had been constructed by the Irrigation and Waterways Department. And those have survived and provide protection. Now, it could also be because of the difference in nature of the two systems, but it could also be because of better construction and better design. If we were to protect all of the Sunderbans, inhabited part of the Sunderbans, which is about 3,221 kilometer long, we will need about 245 billion rupees at 2010 prices. Chairman, sir, you also brought up the issue of when we try to protect a place, if the cost of protection is higher than what is being protected, it may be a no-go option. And therefore, we may also look at other possibilities of dealing with sea level rise and adapting to impacts of climate change. And therefore, to me, accommodation is one kind of an option. And accommodation would mean fairly deep and transformational change in the way people conduct their lives and livelihoods in the Sunderbans. We have heard about agriculture, aquaculture, and for socio-cultural reasons, agriculture has been preferred in the region. But given the lay of the land and the changes that we are anticipating, probably aquaculture is a better option. And Mr. Chakraborty already talked about what could be the options in terms of aquaculture and value addition and so on and so forth. We could also think of advancing so that we can provide protection. That has not happened here and is unlikely because, again, it needs a lot of investment. And retreat is obviously an option, but a very, very difficult and contentious. But nevertheless, retreat happens. Towards the end of Professor Andy's lecture, he talked about nature-based solutions. And it is important that we look at these nature-based solutions simply because without the natural area of the Sunderbans, the protective services that that area provides to land further up, and which has a huge population, not only restricted to the Sunderbans, and Chairman Sir said that up to the city of Kolkata and possibly beyond, that protection service, we are all beneficiaries of that protection service. So nature-based solutions are the way forward to my mind, but at the same time, nature needs space to accommodate the changes that are happening. If nature were to not have that space, if mangroves were not able to move along with the rising sea level, they would drown. And these are not aquatic plants. So the natural services, if we were to hope for and maintain, then some amount of retreat from a certain locations, at-risk locations, is the way forward. So to my mind, two things. One, adaptation is future-looking. I am not responding to not only the current crisis, but I am also anticipating the challenges that we would be faced with and preparing accordingly. So it's not only responding to the current situation. None of these options are usually tried in isolation. They are all pretty much tried in a combination. And it has made my talk easier after having listened to Professor Lodge. Nature-based solutions where we combine some amount of retreat with accommodation and in certain cases protect is the way forward for adaptation to climate change in the Sunderbans. I will not get into the details for the sake of time, and therefore I think I have kept myself within the allotted time, and I will stop here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Danda. I really appreciate the points you have taken, particularly regarding the adaptation solution. And more there's less dry space. And therefore, any solution becomes very, very, very difficult. And it needs a really deep, very deep transformational change for people to, let's say, survive on aquaculture, change whatever they are doing for 3 generations, change their profession to something else. And you are right when you said that nature-based solutions are always the best, but you cannot possibly do the best. Fine. So we are right. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Our next and the last speaker is Mr. Alexei Levian, co-founder of the Desalinator. He will speak on climate and water adaptation in Sunderbans, a microcosm for the whole continent. Dr. Levian, please.
Thank you very much, sir. And I should say I'm not a doctor. Except
I'm sorry.
My parents wish I was.
My apologies. That's here.
No problem. Let me first thank the FCO team for inviting me to participate, and also to Mr. Mukherjee. Thank you for hosting this session. I'm very heartened to hear words around salinity and female empowerment and desalination, and also the bent towards solutions with some of these calls. Today what I do is to share with you a project that we're doing in the Sunderbans that is hopefully a small piece of the solution that we can contribute. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you'll be able to see that okay. Thumbs up. Okay. So,
yes.
Yeah,
okay.
we can see.
Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we're Desolinator. That combines desalination and the sun. So that's the origin of the name. And I first wanted to just make a point about COVID. I first of all would like to wish everybody well during this interesting time. And of course, it's been an absolute disaster globally, but I also want to point that COVID represents a real opportunity for all of us to challenge fundamental assumptions and rethink the kind of future that we want to bring in. We need new ways of communicating, we need new forms of collaboration, and we need new ways of introducing and supporting innovation. And I hope that this will be a catalyst for that. I want to remind the panel that going into COVID, some 40% of the global population didn't have a reliable access to water. And this trend is unfortunately continuing. Competition around the world for water resources is increasing. India writ large is facing many, many challenges around water, but let's talk specifically about this beautiful area of the world, the Sunderbans. And as I won't dwell on this, we all know the cyclones, the Amphan, issues with rainfall and sea levels rising. We know these are systemic realities. And actually, if we look, there was a lot of mention about the salinity in the water, but of course we also have an arsenic belt running all the way from Bangladesh, all the way through North India and through West Bengal. And this is reality, right? This is happening. It's somehow seems very strange to me that many people sort of talk about climate change still theoretically. Unfortunately, this is the reality of people's lives on the ground, where the water...
I'm sorry to kind of budge into. Could you please reshare the screen?
It says sharing is paused. So let me stop my share and then I will reshare. Let's try that. Can you see okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So I actually lived in India for some 5 years in Kerala. So I know Kerala, like West Bengal, has many things in common, proud political tradition and also a love of football. But this is reality, even in Kerala, where there's a lot of water, this is how many people are getting their water through the water truck. And we've spent extensive time in Sunderbans working with local communities. And I would like to share, and this is actually the first time we're talking publicly about this, a project which we brought together as a first step to providing a solution for a specific community in the Sunderbans. How do you do a project in one of the most challenging water scenarios in India and possibly in the world, right? Where there's seawater, brackish water, arsenic in the water. How do you do it in such a place where the infrastructure is very, very limited? Well, what we said is let's bring in the right kind of partners. And we teamed up with a global NGO, but also a very local NGO. We identified a community on the Delta, which really is suffering. And we said, we want to install a system in the toughest scenarios. And we brought in partners such as academic partners, such as the University of Strathclyde, and also a leading global corporate, which we'll be announcing very soon. I've kept it out of today's presentation. We're going to be providing water in a town with 4,000 beneficiaries. We'll provide all of their drinking water needs. It's around 20,000 litres of high-quality water per day. And this is our technology. So what we developed is a combination of solar thermal PVT technology combined with multi-effect distillation. Now, this is a thermal technology. A couple of quick points, and we've been very proud to have been awarded patents on this. And by the way, the first stage of this technology was developed in my garden in Kerala, so there's a strong connection with India. So now think of a normal solar panel. It's only converting about 15% of the potential energy that hits it. The rest is lost as heat. And when the panel heats up, the efficiency drops. When the panel goes to 85 degrees, the efficiency goes to 0. It's one of the reasons that solar PV works better in somewhere like London than it would in somewhere like Riyadh. Now, what we do is we take that 15% of electrical energy, but we also run water through our panels, and we capture thermal energy as well, which means we have a combined efficiency of around 60%. So we get much more efficient use of solar energy. And in multi-effect distillation, we deal with one of the issues that one of the speakers raised around scaling and fouling, which is a big problem for desalination. And we've got a few tricks in our system that we use to manage this. So we've designed this to be a very low maintenance, low OPEX system that can run 100% from solar energy. And I'll explain a little bit more about how that works. This is our system live. And this is our system that we're building, the first of our large-scale systems. And this is from 2 days ago in Dubai. This is funded by the Dubai Water and Electric Company. And we're very proud to be getting this going. So again, you'll see some announcements coming out about this, but we're really excited that for the first time you can have a scalable solar-powered desalination technology that is sustainable. And not only is it sustainable, here's where it gets very exciting, is that it's actually very low cost. So we can take in water, because we're effectively boiling it, from seawater, from brackish water, heavy metal contaminants, and even if that water fluctuates, which a membrane-based system won't be able to deal with, we don't mind, because we're essentially boiling it. We don't use consumables in this system. This is not a membrane-based system. And what that means is that we don't need to use the chemicals that you would normally use to clean membranes. So we have about 5% of the chemical requirements that reverse osmosis does. And even then, we have an anti-scalant. We found a food-safe biological one. And this is exciting, because what it means is that our waste brine is clean, is chemical-free. Now, this system that we're building in Sunderbans is a smaller version of the main product that we're building, which is 10x the size. It's a 250 cubic meter a day system. Again, one of the beauties of this, the way that we've designed this, using heat, what would normally be waste heat in our system, is that we can run this 24 hours a day. Again, an added advantage for maintenance. So if we compare against solar-powered reverse osmosis, you've got solar, and by the way, reverse osmosis is a great technology, but it creates some issues. If it's solar powered, you're going to have to either build a massive battery to store energy to run it at night, or you only run it during daytime hours, and then you have a significant maintenance issue. You know, there's many advantages of our system in the right circumstance for desalination. And the other thing that we like to talk about, because again, you know, we're talking about systemic issues. You know, if you can create high quality, low cost water for less than $1 per cubic meter in a remote area, well, now you're not having trucks moving water. And that the carbon footprints of trucks moving water around the world, I haven't heard anybody yet quantify this, but for me, this is one of the elephants in the room. Every day in Saudi Arabia, they run the largest fleet of trucks in the world every day moving water. And of course, we all know across India, this is how many people get their water. You also disrupt the plastic supply chain and so forth. So we believe in distributed production, local ownership for this kind of system. And let's now look into the Sunderbans, what we're doing. So this is where we are doing our project. We worked very early on to engage the Panchayat to give us some land. I'm going to move my my screen here so you can see this is the land that we've been given here. It's right adjacent to the town. So the production is happening directly next to the town itself. This is what our system will look like from a technical point of view. And I want to emphasize, some of the speakers also touched on the importance of new types of collaboration. We know that technology itself is never the answer. We live in the real world. You have to engage the local community. Now we have a very low maintenance system, but it still needs maintenance. And water still needs to go from our system to the people who need it. So early on, we engaged women in the community, and we followed a co-development, a co-design process with them. We asked them for their ideas, and we've consistently engaged them, working with our local NGO partner, who's built a lot of trust over 30 years working in the community. And the distribution model is across 3 areas. The first one is to provide water in bulk directly to schools. So the schools have a complete water supply, drinking water supply. We're also looking into the local community, so this will be distributed by the women that we're working with in the community. And then through our corporate sponsor, we've found a nice way which ties into the mobility discussion that the Honourable Minister opened with, is how we can get water to them. And we've actually got a donation from the corporate partner of some electric vehicles, which we will use for the older people in the village. The women that we're working with in the community will drive the water to the elderly people in the village, or the people who can't access it. So, you know, this is not going to solve the water crisis in the Sunderbans. And quite honestly, we don't have all the answers. There's many, many hurdles to doing new technology, to try and bring innovation, and to try and bring the right people around it. And we need also support from the people on this call and from the local community as well to make this happen. And one area which we'd really like to support, because we're shipping materials later this year, is to find a really good local civil engineering EPC contractor that we can work with. And I'd like to put that out. If anybody's got some ideas, we're currently now assessing and looking at the right partner. But I'd just like to summarize by saying that COVID truly represents an opportunity to think differently, to disrupt the status quo, to try and do interventions that have a transformative impact. And this is what motivates us. And we very much are open to everyone's support into helping ensure that this project is a success. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexi. I think it was wonderful, a new technology, well, a new equipment. I have always been saying that there will be a time when we can produce water from the seawater, potable from the seawater, only when we can forget about coal-fired energy and all that. Because that doesn't make any sense to take coal-fired energy and then run a desalination. And it's, as you know, it's a very, very power-intensive plant, desalination. So that was nice to know that you are using the heat also from the solar collector. That was wonderful. Very good innovation. And I don't know what will be your footprint difference. It will be considerable, I think. But the solar power desalination technology, I'm very glad that it's coming to the market. And I'm sure there will be a lot of use of that, even in normal times. Thank you very much for this. Okay, so we come to the end of the session, but before that we might have some questions. Angana, do we have some questions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Yeah. So there's questions come observations from Mr. Paul Van Meel from Netherlands, that making the Sunderbans a living delta, it is crucial to improve the livelihood of the people, and it is important to focus on integrated watershed management of the islands and polders, with focus on improved irrigated agriculture and ecological restoration. He has also emphasized on migration of youths from their ancestors' land to the cities for job, And he has cited example of living with water in, say, Mekong and in Irrawaddy deltas. So in connection with that, his question is, what are the solutions for the livelihood of the people for the overall ecology of Sunderbans?
Anybody would like to volunteer? If I'll answer this. Andy, would you like to answer on this?
I'll try and have a go.
Just respond to a little bit of it. What about
I think that comes back to in Gosha's point about the heterogeneity of the delta, that solutions need to be locally rooted. We've gone through a whole period of phases. There's a really nice book on the Mekong Delta, which talks about how we went through the whole period of structural reform in the 1970s with the World Bank and major north-south sort of view on the world, and how the clock is turning around to really the need for taking account of local peoples. And Alexi, you talked about the co-production with the local women on the technology, which is co-production is the way forward. For any policy to be sustainable, we must involve the people, because ultimately they are the people that will live with and make a policy work. Even within a delta, though, the regional differences across the Sundarban are quite large. Quite often populations are isolated, and therefore the localized solutions are, in my view, the key ones. By talking to people in an intergenerational way, working with the young in an educational sense, because they are we are living in the footsteps of our ancestors, as was mentioned yesterday. Our children are the key generation going forward. And again, those viewpoints are typically in an area like that sort of quite limited in terms of both location and time. There's a well-known thing in conservation biology called shifting baseline syndrome, whereby every generation grows up in the environment it inhabits and inherits, treating that as the norm. And intergenerational amnesia is another term for what happens. People forget the past. What culture meant, what ways worked. And so I think that's the way forward in terms of working with local populations, finding their stories and giving them a voice. I'll pass on to other people to follow on from that.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Well, if not, then I'll just supplement Andy by saying what I mentioned in my opening address and what Alexi just now said. We have seen that in case of solar power in Sundarban area itself. It was not successful till we involved the local people. Now they run the plant, now they maintain the plant, they operate the plant, and after a lot of training, of course, and they train other people, their sons and daughters, how to take care of this plant. So it is absolutely imperative that for anything that we want to do in Sundarban or similar other areas, the local people must win. There is no option to it. All right, next question, Angana.
Yes, sir. Mr. Arun Mukherjee, who is the mentor of the Energy and Environment Committee of the Chamber, he's here with us in this meeting room. So I'd request Mr. Mukherjee to please share the questions he has in mind with the speakers of this session.
Yeah. My question is addressed to Dr. Danda. We know that number of villages in the Sundarban area has got severely affected due to the rise of the water level. Now, do we have any mathematical model by which it can be predicted of which are the most affected villages or the residence area which can be saved, number one. Number two, with the rise of the water level, how it is going to impact Calcutta?
So to answer to the first question, yes, there are models and Professor Large, collaborator at Jadavpur University, not only through this project, but even on earlier occasions, at least 2 earlier occasions, I am aware of that they have modeled the sea level rise in the Sunderbans, not only just the Sunderbans, but also the delta, including the Bangladesh part of the delta. And therefore, that information is available, which are the villages that are so-called in the front line of being affected. And some of it is already far too obvious and apparent. If you look at the southwestern part of the Indian Sunderbans, if you look at places like Sagar Block, you look at Navkhana Block, particularly Maushani Island, which our chairman sir mentioned. You look at Pathor Pratima Block, the southern part of it. These don't need modeling. We already know that they're at the forefront. So what was your second question? Sorry.
Calcutta, protection.
Yes. See, so far as urban areas are concerned, which are very densely packed and are economic engines, as such, there is no technological limitation to coping with sea level rise. And in fact, if you look at the last report of the IPCC on the cryosphere and the oceans, it is very clearly mentioned that there are not really technological limitations, but obviously there is a lot of work that needs to happen once you put those protective measures in place. So if you recall, when Professor Sengupta was talking about and the various phases of a disaster cycle, preparedness is one major area. Therefore, the city of Calcutta needs to be very differently prepared than what it is. As of now, we are responding to situations as and when they occur. We are not preempting.
Absolutely.
Yeah? And therefore we struggle. And people like our honorable minister has to spend days on end trying to get the city back on its feet. But if the preparedness level is differently geared, that need not be the case. So
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question.
There is a question on what are the technology being used for destroying the bacteria and viruses for drinking water. Drinking water is a concern for Sunderbans, so I think his concern is about that.
Bacteria. Well, I think Andre, can you comment on it? Sorry, not Andy, Alexi. Can you comment on this?
Sure. Yeah. So there's many different aspects of water that need to be looked at. Generally, bacterial contamination, I would say, is relatively straightforward to deal with. We operate on the more difficult end of the water spectrum. So salt water, arsenic-laden water, and so on. I think it's always important that when you're assessing an intervention is to say what is the best approach for that place and that scenario. And, I think that where we do need to give consideration in particular around bacterial contamination is what happens when the water comes out of our system. That's really where, so actually it's not just looking at the technology itself. Technology, again, is only part of the answer. It's about how do we take that water and get it to people safely for them to consume or to store. I guess our perspective is that bacterial contamination would be a consideration that is relatively straightforward, at least from a production point of view, to deal with.
And also, if I may add, Alexei, the mechanical vapor compression system itself, it operates at a higher temperature, so some of the bacteria could be destroyed to the higher temperature operations.
Devalina, since you're on the screen, do you want to make one or two comments on the prediction? It was not this question, it was the question before. Are there any predictive models to show which area will be most affected and therefore will need most the assistance which is required for a storm or cyclone?
So I can speak from the different storms that we have observed. As we speak, the Texas-Louisiana border is getting hit by Hurricane Laura, and it's causing the storm surge and everything. So what we have seen is that over the years, the storms have become very much more severe, and I completely agree with Dr. Danda that our level of preparedness is not at all compared to where we should be, especially in West Bengal, mainly because of the amount of population that we handle. Models, predictions, they fail. So we are currently working with the Texas Division of Emergency Management. And again, all of us are at a loss of how should we handle the storms, how should we handle be better prepared. Again, it's more of awareness, it's more of doing our own parts maybe, but models fail. So we have seen all models fail throughout.
Absolutely. I think you have hit the nail on the head. The models are models. We have to remember that always. Sometimes they succeed very well, in fact, and sometimes that's quite true. Thank you. Do you have any other question?
Yes, sir. Mr. Gautam Ray, Chairperson of the Energy and Environment Committee, the chamber is here, so he would also like to share some of his thoughts.
All right.
Good evening, almost. Been speaking on the preparedness, and not in the defense, but I am saying that the world has witnessed many such storms, cyclones. Little bit of figures on it speaks that even with the restoration on the question of essentials, even in the developed country that we are speaking of, fortnight, month or so it has taken. Not I'm speaking of very old days, I'm speaking even in the recent past. So it all depends where we are, how much, it is not an unrelated subject, it is a related subject in a sense that unless we take this in synchronism with the overall economic activity and the overall development activity, it is not the question of gold plating or in the question of something which we can prepare because everything has a cost. So that balance where we have to draw, I fully agree with Mr. Mukherjee, Alok Mukherjee. It should speak for a model. It should speak for a logical conclusion. It's not a generalized thing of speaking that on the preparedness. Second point is that be it on the pandemic, this is also a calamity. Be it in the cyclone, the whole process of centralization of the delivery mechanism and the resource mobilization and the delivery mechanism, how long it is sustainable or whether, I am not an expert on it, but just a thought process, whether some sort of decentralized, sustainable islands will be a approach. Suppose something happens somewhere, so at least the pockets of islands will be able to sustain for some times to come. So this type of both decentralization as well as centralization and a proper matching on it is probably one of the thought process we can think of. Because whenever it happens, it is an untraveled path. Before COVID-19, we didn't know that it will happen. So these are all untraveled paths. Last 2 years, probably I personally and many of you attended many seminars speaking on the disruptions. But nowhere we have planned or discussed about something like this. So it will be something which we will not be able to visualize beforehand. That is my, it's just an thought, it came to my mind and I'm sharing.
Well, thank you very much. for sharing this, Gautam. There are some valid points that everything is related to a cost. You know, the preparedness, to be prepared for something like this when it happens, disaster, it has a cost. It has a cost, and it depends on the, well, the pecuniary ability of that particular society to see how much they can do it. But it is also true that sometimes it doesn't require that much of money, it doesn't have that much of cost. But even then, we are not prepared for that. This is something I think we can avoid probably and try to avoid in future as well. And your other point, the resource mobilization, I think it's generally quite a good idea if you can make a kind of, as you said, as you use the word island, or either decentralized or centralized, whatever, which can sustain not only itself, but the areas around it for some time before help comes to. Help in large potency. I think we should give it a thought. Definitely we should give it a thought, and we should give it a thought together with the government and NGOs and other people, those who are working. And the final point of disruption, we have talked so far disruptions in a completely different manner. We talked about disruption in energy production. We talked about disruption in manufacturing of steel and all that. Complete new people, new process, new technology. We actually have not prepared ourselves for this kind of disruption, like COVID, for example. Cyclones have been happening from ages, but even then, when a super cyclone like this, Amphan, comes, we are not even half prepared. We are very little prepared. But there are success stories. There are success stories partially in Bangladesh. They have, with World Bank loan, they have built thousands and thousands of cyclone shelters. But then one problem is the people don't want to move to the cyclone shelter. That has been happening, and Odisha has also handled it quite well. So it is a combination. It's a socio-economic combination. You ask people that there is a warning of cyclone, you must go to the cyclone shelter. They will know. They will say, no, I won't go. I will die here. This is where my forefathers have lived. I will die here. Now, these sort of things have also happened in Bengal, in Odisha, and all that. But it is true that COVID-19 has taught us a lesson. This lesson we have learned, that when you talk about disruption, it is not only disruption in technology or something better, something good when the society is normal. But we must also do something when society is abnormal, or under the abnormal conditions. And cyclones create abnormal conditions for certain people. And COVID has created abnormal conditions for everyone. Well, I think we should close the session now. Or do you have any other questions?
If I'm allowed to ask one question.
Yeah.
And this is
very good.
Thank you. And this is directed to Alexei. But in light of what Mr. Joyanta Chakraborty was saying when he said land shaping, making water available for agriculture during the dry winter months. Incidentally, dry winter months are also the time post-November when the cyclonic activity is far lower. And therefore, my question to Alexei is the system that is coming up. From your presentation, it is apparent that it is meant to meet drinking water requirements. But could this system also support agricultural water requirements, as Mr. Joyanta Chakraborty was talking?
I'll give a very brief answer. Yes, we're creating high quality water. In this particular system, I'd say it wouldn't be cost effective for agriculture.
Yes, right.
We're really focusing on drinking.
It would be too expensive.
Yeah. In this scenario.
Or that.
However, with our larger scale system, because we get an economy of scale when we're at 10x this size, we're already looking at several agriculture opportunities, particularly closed-loop greenhouses. Let me make one other point, which is that regarding the cyclones, we are going on the assumption that the sad reality is that Sunderbans will have a cyclone every single year. That's the reality of climate change. And so we specifically had to design our system in such a way that we can pack it up within a day. So actually bringing in design thinking when actually around the local context has been critical for this. You know, I think again it's the you know, having a context for thinking about innovation and that kind of innovation dialogue where we're open to ideas and open to these kind of things is really what will move the dial in this kind of preparedness you referenced, Dr. Mukherjee.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have to close this session now. I would just like to say that the way to go is possible, as I think Angela Merkel has said once, with a lot of other things, that this must be considered to be a century of decarbonization. All these things, the root has gone back to carbon. Carbon which has made us rich. Carbon which has given us everything over the past centuries. Even that carbon is creating the problem. So this must be a century of decarbonization. Climate change is not some distance far off problem. It is happening here and now, and we have to stop that. And with that, it is left for me only to thank the speakers for their wonderful cooperation and the audience for being so patient. Thank you very much, all of you, and enjoy the next session.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for joining us in this session. So we would request the tech team to play the video on Sunderbans by Newcastle University. So, thank you. We are moving on to the next session, that is e-mobility forum.